Hi everyone, this is Pastor Alan Wen from Faith and Joy Church. Today we gather under the gentle weight of history. Today we reflect on a life, not of fame, not of fortune, but a life of humble service. The world has just witnessed the passing of Pope Francis, a man who, despite standing on one of the greatest stages in human history, chose to kneel instead of ascend. He chose to wash feet instead of demand crowns. You know, when great leaders pass away, whether it's presidents, innovators, or artists, the world pauses to remember. When Steve Jobs died, millions mourned the mind that changed technology. When Nelson Mandela passed, millions celebrated the man who changed a nation. But when Pope Francis departed this earth, it wasn't just about what he accomplished. It was about how he walked. He walked humbly. He walked simply. He walked as one who carried a towel, not a throne. And the world noticed. More than 250,000 people gathered at his funeral. Leaders from over 170 nations came. Not all were Catholic. Not all were even believers. But they came. Why? Because a life of truth humility transcends religion, politics, and culture. Because humility is a universal language, and Pope Francis spoke it fluently. Friends, today's message is not about a title. It's not about an office. It's about a legacy of service, a legacy that every follower of Jesus is invited to create. You and I may never stand on balconies in Vatican City, but every day we stand on the balconies of our homes, our workplaces, our communities. The question is, what will the world see when they look at our lives? Will they see a crown seeker or a cross carrier? Will they see someone building an empire or someone washing feet in love? Today we remember a man, and we are called higher because we don't follow titles, we don't follow traditions, we follow Jesus Christ, the ultimate example of a humble servant. And through our lives we will echo his light in a world desperate for hope. Welcome to Faith and Joy Church. Welcome to the journey. Welcome home. Friends, today we continue to reflect, not just on a man, but on a story that changed the face of a church and touched the world. Pope Francis, born Jorge Mario Bergoglio, was not born in Rome. He was not born into power or privilege. He was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, far from the marble halls of the Vatican, closer to the dusty streets where ordinary people live, struggle, and hope. And perhaps that's the first lesson we learn today. God delights to raise up leaders from unexpected places. When David was chosen to be king, he wasn't standing in the palace, he was tending sheep. When Abraham Lincoln was preparing to lead a nation, he was splitting rails in the frontier. Bergoglio, the son of immigrants, would one day walk into history as the 266th Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. But he wasn't just any pope. He was the first Jesuit pope from a tradition that values education, service, and sacrificial missions. He was the first pope from the Americas, reminding a watching world that God's work is not limited by borders or traditions. He was the first non-European pope in over 1,000 years, a bridge between the old world and the new, a voice for the global church. Imagine it with me. After a millennium of European leadership, the Spirit moved across continents, languages, and cultures to choose a humble priest from South America. And the world listened. When Amazon expanded beyond books, it was no longer about a category, it was about a new way to serve. When Pope Francis stepped onto the world stage, it wasn't just about tradition, it was about reimagining service with humility. He didn't come to reinforce walls, he came to build bridges. He didn't come to seek applause, he came to wash feet. And from that moment, a movement began, not of rebellion, but of renewal, not of spectacle, but of substance. Today we honor not just his achievements, but the way he answered the ancient call. Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Isaiah 6:8. And like Isaiah, Jorge Mario Bergoglio said, Here am I, send me. Welcome to a deeper reflection. Welcome to Faith and Joy Church. Welcome to the journey. When we think about greatness, we often imagine grand beginnings, palaces, famous families, privileged pathways. But today let's remember, God often writes his greatest stories from the humblest beginnings. Pope Francis, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, was not born into royalty or riches. He was the son of Italian immigrants, a family who crossed oceans not to seek thrones, but to seek opportunity. They carried not crowns, but courage. Before Bergoglio ever wore a priest's robe, he wore the humble identity of a chemical technician. He studied hard, worked long hours, lived quietly. It reminds me of how Abraham Lincoln split rails before he saved a nation, how Mother Teresa taught young girls in Calcutta before she became a global icon of mercy, how Howard Schultz, founder of Starbucks, grew up in the projects of Brooklyn before changing how the world shares coffee and conversation. Greatness is rarely born in golden cradles. It's usually formed in small places, shaped by big hearts. In 1958, Bergoglio answered a different call, not to chemicals, but to Christ. He joined the Jesuit order, a society devoted to education, service, and sacrifice. And in 1969, he was ordained as a priest, not with pomp, but with prayer. Those who knew him didn't marvel at his ambition, they marveled at his humility. They didn't praise his achievements, they praised his passion for social justice, his heart for the least, the lost, the forgotten. Bergoglio's story is a reminder to every one of us. You don't have to start in power to end in purpose. You don't need a royal name. You just need a willing heart. You don't need an empire behind you. You just need the breath of God's Spirit before you. Maybe today you feel small. Maybe you feel overlooked. But remember, God sees the humble. And in God's hands, small beginnings lead to eternal legacies. Welcome to Faith and Joy Church. Welcome to a place where humble stories are celebrated. Welcome to the beginning of something eternal. When Pope Francis stepped onto the world stage as the leader of the Catholic Church, many people expected tradition. But what they got was transformation. Here was a pope who chose the name Francis after Saint Francis of Assisi, the patron saint of the poor. That choice alone sent a message louder than words, that his papacy would be about the least, the lost, the forgotten. He became an advocate for the poor and marginalized, not just from a distance, but up close. He washed the feet of prisoners. He visited slums. He embraced lepers. He crossed borders to stand with refugees. It makes me think of great CEOs who walked the factory floor, leaders like Sam Walton, who went to small towns to meet his employees, or Howard Schultz, visiting Starbucks stores worldwide, not staying in a corner office, but listening at the counter. True leadership is presence. True influence is proximity. Pope Francis promoted interfaith dialogue in a world that often divides over difference. He reached out to Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, even atheists, not to compromise truth, but to open doors for peace. It was like Steve Jobs inviting rivals to collaborate on new ideas, or how Nelson Mandela sat at tables with his former enemies. Because dialogue is not weakness. Dialogue is strength under control. He championed environmental stewardship, calling the world to care for creation. He reminded us that we are stewards, not owners, that this earth is a gift from God entrusted to us for generations. Even companies like Patagonia, or leaders like Elon Musk with renewable energy, understand that innovation without sustainability is a shallow victory. But perhaps what marked Pope Francis most was his choice for simple living over papal luxury. He refused the golden throne. He lived in a modest guest house. He rode a simple car. He wore plain shoes. He lived what Jesus taught, that leadership is not measured by crowns, but by crosses, not by how high you sit, but how low you stoop to serve. Friends, today's message is a challenge. In a world obsessed with more, Pope Francis showed us the power of less. In a culture that glorifies fame, he glorified faithfulness. In a system addicted to consumption, he modeled compassion. May his life remind us that true greatness is found not in being served, but in serving others. Welcome to Faith and Joy Church. Welcome to a journey of humble greatness. When a leader passes away, the world stops to remember. But some funerals are not just moments of mourning, they are mirrors reflecting the legacy of a life. On April 21st, 2025, Pope Francis took his final breath at the age of 88. But in many ways, his final breath was not an ending. It was the punctuation on a life that had already spoken volumes. 5 days later, more than 250,000 people gathered at St. Peter's Square. Imagine that, 250,000 people standing shoulder to shoulder. presidents, prime ministers, princes, pilgrims, all united under the banner of one humble life. It reminds me of Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral, where thousands came not to admire a title, but to honor a testimony. Or when Billy Graham passed, and leaders across political aisles stood together, because some lives are too powerful to ignore. When Pope Francis was laid to rest at the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore, it wasn't just a burial. It was a declaration that a man who chose simplicity over splendor, who chose service over status, could command the attention of nations. Why? Because humility has a gravity all its own. Think of it. In a world where tech billionaires build rockets to reach the stars, Pope Francis pointed back to the dirt under our feet, the poor, the hurting, the forgotten. While CEOs built skyscrapers to leave their mark, he bent down to wash feet, leaving a mark on human hearts. The attendance at his funeral wasn't a tribute to his office. It was a tribute to his obedience. And friends, that's the challenge for all of us. Titles will fade, positions will change, but a life poured out in humble love echoes into eternity. Or the Apostle Paul said, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Pope Francis did just that. And now his baton is in our hands. Will we run with it? Welcome to Faith and Joy Church. Welcome to a place where legacies are not measured by power, but by purpose. Welcome home. When we look back at the life of Pope Francis, we don't just see events, we see lessons, deep, timeless lessons that challenge us today. The first is humility. In a world where leaders compete for attention, Pope Francis chose simplicity. He chose to live in a guest house rather than the papal palace. He drove a modest car instead of a luxury vehicle. He wore plain shoes instead of designer ones. And in that simplicity, he showed us something profound. True authority doesn't need to shout. It whispers. It leads by example. It reminds me of great business leaders like Tim Cook or Warren Buffett. Buffett still lives in the same house he bought decades ago. Cook keeps a modest profile, despite leading one of the world's biggest companies, because humility isn't weakness, it's wisdom under control. The second lesson is compassion. Pope Francis reached out to the marginalized, the poor, the refugees, the prisoners. He didn't wait for them to come to him. He went to them. He washed their feet. He listened to their stories. He reminded them they mattered. It's like the story of Mother Teresa in the slums of Calcutta, or the way Chick-fil-A trains its employees to see every customer as the guest, regardless of status. Compassion changes lives, one act at a time. And the third lesson is service. Pope Francis lived a life of service, aligning every step with Christ's teachings. He didn't just talk about love, he acted it. He didn't just preach forgiveness, he extended it. His hands were never too clean to touch the hurting. His heart was never too busy to carry another's burden. Friends, these are not just qualities for popes. These are the qualities of a Christ follower. These are the qualities our world desperately needs: humility, compassion, service. And here's the challenge. What would our families look like if we lived this way? What would our workplaces look like? What would our communities look like? Maybe you're not called to a global platform, but you are called to a kingdom purpose. Welcome to Faith and Joy Church. Welcome to a place where these lessons come alive. Welcome to a journey of becoming more like Christ. Friends, now we've come to the most important question. What do we do with this? What do we do with the life and lessons of Pope Francis? What do we do with the example of Jesus Christ? We've heard about humility. We've heard about compassion. We've heard about service. But hearing is not enough. Faith without works is dead. So how can we embody these virtues? First, we live with humility. That doesn't mean thinking less of ourselves. It means thinking of ourselves less. It means stepping off the stage and lifting others up. It's what Jim Collins in Good to Great called Level 5 leadership, a blend of humility and fierce resolve. It's the leader who doesn't need the spotlight because they're too busy building something that lasts. Second, we serve those in need. Not once, not when it's convenient, but as a lifestyle. Pope Francis washed feet. The greatest among you must be the servant of all. Companies like Patagonia, Tom's Shoes, even Chick-fil-A have baked generosity into their business models. Why? Because service transforms not only the receiver, but the giver. And third, we shine Christ's love in our community, not with billboards or bumper stickers, but with everyday actions, a kind word, a patient response, a sacrificial gift, like the early church in Acts 2, who had favor with all the people because they lived differently. Their love wasn't just spoken, it was seen. Imagine if our neighborhoods saw churches not as fortresses, but as fountains, not as walls, but as wells. Imagine if every member of Faith and Joy Church left this message today determined to live humility, to serve need, and to shine love. The world doesn't need louder opinions. It needs brighter lights. The question is not whether we've been inspired by Pope Francis's life. The question is whether we'll be changed by it. So I invite you, make a decision today. Live humbly, serve boldly, love extravagantly. Welcome to Faith and Joy Church. Welcome to a movement of humble greatness. Welcome to the journey. Friends, now we've come to the most important question. What do we do with this? What do we do with the life and lessons of Pope Francis? What do we do with the example of Jesus Christ? We've heard about humility. We've heard about compassion. We've heard about service. But hearing is not enough. Faith without works is dead. So how can we embody these virtues? First, we live with humility. That doesn't mean thinking less of ourselves. It means thinking of ourselves less. It means stepping off the stage and lifting others up. It's what Jim Collins in Good to Great called Level 5 leadership, a blend of humility and fierce resolve. It's the leader who doesn't need the spotlight, as they're too busy building something that lasts. Second, we serve those in need, not once, not when it's convenient, but as a lifestyle. Pope Francis washed feet. Jesus washed feet. The greatest among you must be the servant of all. Companies like Patagonia, Tom's Shoes, even Chick-fil-A have baked generosity into their business models. Why? Because service transforms not only the receiver, but the giver. And third, we shine Christ's love in our community, not with billboards or bumper stickers, but with everyday actions, a kind word, a patient response, a sacrificial gift, like the early church in Acts 2, who had favor with all the people because they lived differently. Their love wasn't just spoken, it was seen. Imagine if our neighborhoods saw churches not as fortresses, but as fountains, not as walls, but as wells. Imagine if every member of Faith and Joy Church left this message today determined to live humility, to serve need, and to shine love. The world doesn't need louder opinions. It needs brighter lights. The question is not whether we've been inspired by Pope Francis's life. The question is whether we'll be changed by it. So I invite you, make a decision today. Live humbly, serve boldly, love extravagantly. Welcome to Faith and Joy Church. Welcome to a movement of humble greatness. Welcome to the journey.